We have a sales table and a person by month sales total report. And our goal is to be able to paste data below the table, Control V, and instantly with formulas, our report updates. But wait a second. 2 videos ago, we saw how to do this with SUMIFS and a pivot table. Last video, we saw how to do it with dynamic spilled arrays and learn the basics of array formulas. So what are we going to do in this video? We're going to create the entire report in a single cell, and our spilled array formulas will automatically have a grand total row. So when I paste the data, the report updates, and so does the grand total. We'll create the single cell report using the amazing new let function. Now, last video, we created 3 different formulas in 3 different columns. And we had to repeat formula elements like this month array calculation multiple times in the formula. So every time we use month here, it had to recalculate it. What we want to do in this video is take all 3 columns, put them into one formula, and avoid that repetition by defining variables inside the let function. Equals let. The first argument name, that's the name of the first variable, comma. Then comes the formula element associated with that name, comma. And then all other arguments, you have the choice. Do you make your final calculation, or do you name the next variable? Now I'm going to Alt-Enter to add a new line, and we'll have a new line for each group of variables. The first thing we need to do is bring in the 3 columns into our formula. So the first variable name will be D, comma. The value for that variable is the date column, comma. P, that'll be the name, comma, for the person column, comma. S, comma, that'll be the name for the sales column, comma. Alt-Enter. And from that date column right here, we're going to need to figure out what the min date is. And if it's not the first of the month, then we'll have to jump it back to the first of the month. So we'll say d min, that's the name of the variable, and we'll use the min function. And guess what? Instead of highlighting the column, we use our variable d. Close parentheses. Now, if we drag this huge screen tip over here and comma, as we're building our let formula, there's a lot of elements. And I'm not sure what this evaluates to. In fact, in a regular Excel formula, you can highlight and hit F9, but that doesn't work inside of let. So oftentimes, I like to temporarily use the calculation here and say d min. Let's just look at what that's delivering. I'll apply date number formatting. OK, so that is the min date, F2. From that, we need to get the start. So our name 5 will be D, and I'll call it start, comma. And for our start date, we're going to use the date function. And in the year argument, we're going to use the year function. And we need our dmin variable. We can down arrow in the drop down. And that X icon means this is a variable inside of the let function. Now I can hit Tab to enter the variable, then close parentheses, comma. For the month argument, we'll use the month function on dmin. And then comma for day, we just put 1. Close parentheses, comma, and I'm going to use calculation again, d start. I see the variable highlighted in blue, so I hit the Tab key. Close parentheses, Control-Enter. And we'll use that variable to help us calculate the start and end of each month so we can calculate the correct total sales. F2, we'll backspace and Alt-Enter. Now we need to calculate a month unique list. So we'll call our variable mul, comma, the unique function, and then month, looking at the date variable. Close parentheses, and if we look at mul, month unique list, there it is. Now we need to count. So I'm going to call the variable month count, comma, and we're counting numbers, so we use the count function, month unique list, comma, and the month count, we'll look at it, is 3, F2. Now backspace, Alt-Enter. Now we need a unique list of persons. So person unique list, comma. And we want this list to be sorted, so we're going to use the sort function. And then the unique function, looking at the person column. Close, close. And we'll look at the person unique list. There it is. Now we need to count F2. Person count. And those are text values, so we use counta, looking at the person unique list. And the person count is 4. Now, if we look over here, 4 times 3 will give us the number of records. And then 4 times 3 plus 1 will give us the total rows in the final report. And we're also going to need to count all of the cells in the report. F2, backspace, Alt, Enter. So I'll call this one records for number of records. And we'll say person count times month count, comma, and the number of records, 12. F2. Rows will be the next variable, and that's number of records plus 1. The plus 1 is because we're going to have the grand total cell, comma, and then rows should give us 13. F2. And we are going to need later in our formula a few times the actual total number of cells in our report. So we'll call that variable cells, and we'll say rows times 3 columns. And then we'll look at what cells gives us. It should be 39. F2. We're finally going to need in this line of variables right here, all the counting numbers, we're going to need a sequence. Because in order to repeat persons in a certain pattern and months in a certain pattern, we're going to need 1 to 12, but we're going to adjust it. So it starts at 0 and goes to 11. So we'll call this variable sequence. And then we'll use the sequence function. The number of rows is the number of records, comma. Columns, the default is 1, and the start is 0. And then sequence, if we look at it, should give us 0 to 11. Now, our next goal is somehow we have to repeat names like this. Remember, we have a unique list with one of each. And from that unique list, if we're to look them up, Chantel is in the first position, Joe is in the second. So we actually need a repeating pattern of numbers, 111, 222, 333, and so on. The way we're going to do that is we're going to take this sequence and divide by the count of months to get a bunch of decimals and partial numbers, and then we'll take the integer. So we're going to get rid of that, Alt, Enter. And I'm going to call this column right here that we're going to create person criteria. Because yes, it's going to be one of the columns in the final report, but it's also going to be used inside of the SUMIFS function. So I'm going to call it person criteria, comma, and we'll just take a look at what sequence, that's the 0 to 11 divided by month count, looks like. Person criteria. So there's a pattern here. If we take the integer, we'll have a bunch of zeros here, a bunch of ones here, and so on. So F2, integer, that means moving down. So all those decimals will move to 0. 1 with some decimals will move to 1, and so on. That's not quite enough because we need 1s, 2s. So F2, we have to add 1. If you were watching last video, you remember we had to do all of these same calculations, but in lots of different cells instead of all in a single formula. So that is looking good. Now, guess what? That is an array of row numbers that we can use inside of index. So that's going to be the row numbers inside of index. So we use index. And what are we looking up? The person unique list with 4 people, comma. And then there for row number is a function argument array operation, which will spill all of these names. And notice how we did this. We left the variable here so we could look at it each time as we build this. So now when I enter it, that's exactly what we want. We use this result in the final report, but also inside the SUMIFS function, F2. I'm going to backspace, Alt, Enter. Now, the next thing we're going to try and build is 2 columns of dates. We need to repeat end dates and start dates in the same pattern. To get that pattern, we're going to say, hey, month sequence. And for a second, we're going to remind ourselves and look at sequence by looking at the month sequence. Whereas when we were trying to repeat 111, 222, we divided by the month count, took the integer and added 1. when we try to create these end dates and then the start dates, we're going to have to do something completely different. To calculate the start date, we'll use the EDATE function. We'll have a column of start dates, and we'll actually add months, 012, 012, to jump forward to the correct column of start dates. For end dates, we use end of month function. And we use the same start dates and the same pattern of jumping a certain number of months forward to get our column of end dates. From our 0 to 11, we're going to need the pattern 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. Well, guess what? If we divide by the count here and take the remainder, 0 divided by 3 is 0 with the remainder 0. 1 divided by 3 is still 0, but the remainder's 1. Then the remainder's 2. Then the pattern repeats. 0, 1, 2. Those are the remainders all the way down. F2. So we take sequence, and the function that gives us the remainder is mod. Comma, and the divisor, or the denominator, is month count. Close parentheses. And there's our repeating pattern, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. If we use that with the start date inside of EDATE, we get the start of the month. Inside of end of the month, we get the end of the month. So F2. Now we had to create that variable because we're going to use it twice. And just as I said person criteria, here I'm going to say start date criteria. And if we use EDATE, using the date start, there's our variable, so tab, comma, and what are the months? A function argument array operation with our M sequence, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. Close parentheses, and let's look at what this delivers. If we add some number formatting, that is amazing, F2. Now watch this. I'm going to totally cheat because what we need for end of the month is almost exactly the same. Control-C. And I'm going to call this end date criteria. And the function is not EDATE, but we need to jump end of month, comma, end date criteria. And we should get January through February, end of month. January through February, end of month. Looking good. F2. Now I'm going to backspace, Alt, Enter. Now we need to create this column. I'm going to call it totals. SUMIFS. The sum range is S, comma, criteria range. Well, we'll look at the person column first, comma, criteria argument, person criteria, comma, criteria range 2, date. We're going to have to look at date twice, comma. The first criteria is going to be the lower limit. So if I put start date criteria, that will not work. I have to put the comparative operator to ask the question, in double quotes, how many dates in the date column are greater than or equal to, and then join it to all of the lower end dates, comma. Criteria range 3 is D, comma. Then this is the upper limit, so less than or equal to in double quotes, and join it to end date criteria. Close parentheses, comma, and then we'll see what this gives us, totals. Well, those are a bunch of dates. I can apply general or use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift tilde. And those are looking good. Now at the top, F2. So we have first column, second column, third column for the middle part of our report without the grand totals. Now anytime you have columns, Alt, Enter, and you want to join them together, we can use choose. Now I'm going to call this report choose. And the index number, since we get to put whatever we want to look up in the remaining arguments, if we put in array syntax, curly bracket, 1, 2, 3, that means give me all 3 columns simultaneously. But there's got to be commas between them, because in array syntax, that means go over a column. Close curly bracket. Now for value, person criteria, which will be the first column in our report, comma, end date criteria, the second column, comma, and then totals. Close parentheses. And let's look at what rep gives us. Now at this point, I'm going to highlight as many cells below as I think the report might expand and add date number formatting. Same with this column for currency. Now the only trick is the last bit. We're going to need some grand totals. So at the top, F2, Alt, Enter. Now we're going to use the switch function to look everything up and put it into the right place. That's the last cell, number 39. So 39 will get the sum of the sales column. 38 will get grand total. 37 will get nothing. And then the remaining items will get this report right here. And we're going to use switch, but first we have to create an array from 1 to 39. So I'm going to use sequence function. And for rows, we have a variable called rows. Right now it's 13, comma, and we need 3 columns. So that way 13 times 3 will be 39. Now let's look. And this is the last argument, which means we're actually making the calculation. So close parentheses. And there it is, 1 to 39. And we're allowed to put all of these numbers inside of the switch function. And then if we say switch, get 39 and put the sum there, it will. 38, we'll put the text grand total, and it will do that. So F2. Now we, at the end in our calculation, switch. There's the expression, backspace, comma. Then for value, we need a 39 there, but we need it dynamic. That's where cells comes in. So in the 39th position, comma, the result is going to be the sum of S, close parentheses. Now watch this. We can close parentheses on switch. We're not done yet, but close parentheses on let. And if I Control Enter, I got everything with NAs, but the total is in exactly the right place, F2. Now we continue on with switch, comma, cells minus 1. Well, we want grand totals. And if we look, well, look at that. It's starting to appear. F2, value 3. That's going to be cells minus 2. And watch this. I'm going to comma and put double quote to show nothing. Close, close. The last row is looking good. Now all we have left is the default. So F2. So when I comma on switch, I can either put a 4th value and result 4, or I can put the default, which is going to be report. Close, close, Control Enter. That is absolutely amazing. If I change this to S, it is working. Now Control Z. Now what if we change a date and add a year? So one of these dates is in the next year. Our report, when I hit Enter, is going to fail because Miki should really have that 1,645 not in January for 21, but January for 22. So let's see how to edit. Because F2, there's only one variable that is influenced here. Notice we have 1, 2, 3. That's because we got a unique list of months and counted. But what we really need in this case is if we're going to have consecutive dates, we need all 12 months from 21 and 1 extra month from 22. So really, we need to repeat each employee name 13 times. So we simply have to edit MC. And I'm going to get rid of all of that. We don't need this anymore. And in order to count the total number of months, we have dmin for the min date. We're going to need dmax. And we'll calculate the max date from that column. And now we'll recalculate the month count. And this formula element comes from our teammate Excel Wizard. In parentheses, we need the year of dmax. Right now, that'll give us 22. Minus the year of dmin. That'll give us 21. So that subtraction right there gives us 1 year. We need to multiply it by all the months times 12. And we need any extra months in whatever the last year is. So we add and do a similar calculation, but with the month function on dmax. In this case, it'll be 1, month 1, minus month of dmin. Uh-oh, that's 1 minus 1, which is fine for our particular case. we'll add 1 back in. If the max month happened to be 6, then it would be 6 minus our current 1 is 5 plus 1 would give us 6. And that is our new calculation. All of the other places where MC is used will now be updated. When I hit Enter, I have some rows hidden, so I want to come over to 24 to 77 and highlight the row headers. Right-click, unhide. And there's our report. Now I'm going to undo this, but now this at least can accommodate new years. Control-Z, and then change this back to 1. Now let's add some new data. Down at the bottom, we're going to copy, paste at the bottom. And just like that, our report is updating. Now, we want to add some conditional formatting. So however many rows get spilled for this report, we have our formatting. I'm going to highlight enough rows all the way down to accommodate any new data. Conditional formatting. New rule. Use a formula. In our formula, we're going to say, hey, that cell right there, and this needs to be a relative cell reference. So I'm going to hit the F4 key 3 times. When you are not less than, greater than, and then double quote, double quote. This formula will do 2 things. When the cells are empty, like down here, there'll be no formatting. And because we use double quotes, that's a 0-length text string right there. Since that cell contains 0-length text string, that won't get any formatting either. So you can add whatever formatting you'd like. OK. Click OK. And now I want to add one more bit of conditional formatting. I want bold in the row that holds grand total. Conditional formatting, new rule. And for this formula in the K column, I'm going to click the top cell. And we need the whole row to get the pattern of trues. So I hit the F4 key once and twice. Lock the K column, but not the row. Anytime you are equal to grand totals. And then format, font, bold. Click OK. Click OK. And there's our finished report. If I realize that Joe's were actually Mickey sales, I do a find and replace, replace all, and our report updates. Control-Z. Now here's a bonus trick. The intent of this data set is just to add data every month. But if we change one of the dates to a year, our report updates. But what about all these zeros? Now, we won't get these zeros if we just add data each month. But F2 at the top. In this argument right here, we made our calculation. But forget that. I'm going to call this full report. So now we've defined it as a variable, comma, Alt, Enter. And we'll just filter out from our final report any zeros in the third column. Well, wait a second. I can't just put final report, but I can use index, comma, to look up all the rows. You put a 0 or leave it omitted, comma. And then for column number, we'll say, hey, just look at the third column. So index is looking up the third column. And I'm going to say when you're greater than 0. So there we have as our final calculation of filter to get rid of the zeros. And sure enough, there's Miki 1 to 4, but there's that one rogue 23. Now I'm going to change this back to 2001. All right, so that was a lot of fun with the let function. We took 3 columns of formulas, as we saw in last video, mashed them all into a single cell formula. We saw how to avoid repetition by defining variables. We also importantly saw, as we built our let function, how to use the calculation argument to look at each piece as we created our results. And we saw how to go back and edit a variable or add something later. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from excelisfun. And be sure to check out the other 2 videos in this series.